We will wait for some time to allow all participants to join. So before we begin, a couple of housekeeping checks here. So if you can hear me clearly, I request you to please type yes in the chat box window. Okay, I can see 1, 2, 3. Oh, okay, you can hear me. Thank you. Throughout our presentation, we encourage you to interact with our speakers by typing in questions and comments using the question pane. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible in our Q&A section, which would be there after the presentation. First of all, on behalf of MVC Systems, a warm welcome to all of you, and good morning and good afternoon. I'm Mahesh Kumar Kharade, an associate architect at MVC Systems and your host for today. I have around 8+ years of experience in design and development of enterprise systems across multiple domains like healthcare, retail, e-learning, and business intelligence. I have also worked on a multitude of challenging projects with technologies ranging from Java, JavaScript, JavaScript Frameworks, UI libraries, PHP, ROR, and few more. I'm pleased to welcome you for today's webinar on JavaScript MVC Frameworks, Backbone, Ember, and AngularJS, the paradigm shift and the impact on the application development. Let me also introduce my colleague and a fellow speaker for today's session, Meera Navle, a software engineer at MVC Systems. Meera, with close to 3 years of experience in development of enterprise systems across different domains. She has worked on technologies ranging from Java, JavaScript frameworks, again Ruby on Rails, PhoneGap, and so on. So without further ado, let's start the session. So to kind of get into the agenda for today's session, we'll start with a overview of web application UI and single page applications. So what I want to do here is kind of quickly walk you through some of the basics of web application user interface and a single page application, because I see them being a key factor for use of kind of encouraging the use of JavaScript MVC framework. Then we'll get into understanding the overall JavaScript ecosystem. So as we try to understand the MVC JavaScript framework, I would also want you to walk through some of the other framework ecosystem that exists in the JavaScript language today. Then we'll get into the actuals of JavaScript MVC framework, where we'll try to understand some of the features, architectural aspects, and the key components of the JavaScript MVC. Then we'll get into kind of knowing some of the key JavaScript MVC frameworks like Backbone.js, AngularJS, and EmberJS at high level. So we'll try to understand them at the concept level, what they are, how they work, what are the key components. And once we get a fair understanding of these frameworks, we'll try to understand what are the criteria for choosing such frameworks when you are trying to develop your application or kind of choosing it for your own use. And we'll also kind of do a quick walkthrough of a couple of case studies to understand how some of these frameworks are helping us in developing these applications. So let's start with the web application. So user interface. So to start with that, I think most of us have started with like a basic web page containing kind of components like data grids, list views, or some charts. So that's what probably is some of the basic stuff that we all know or kind of have done in the past. So there have been like different approaches, like handling everything on the server to kind of prepare needed response and then present it to user while doing these kind of web pages. This approach kind of had its own limitations, as everything can be kind of cannot be done rather on the server side. So in a way, it's like more of a finding the right balance between the server and the client side processing kind of has been there in the like kind of a discussion point for a long time. Then with Ajax and libraries like jQuery, this problem was solved to some extent. So basically, it allowed developers to kind of offload some of the server responsibilities to the UI, to achieve the next level of interaction. This model works fine for components where user interaction is involved in triggering certain actions to either fetch or load data on demand. So if you kind of look at some of the modern day components like newsfeed or a component that needs to be updated more frequently than a grid, then like Ajax has its own limitations. Also, the overall reputation of the logic and the maintenance complexities are kind of on the higher side if you go by this approach. Also, with the number of increased number of components and interaction on the user interface side, web page is like not just a web page nowadays. It's kind of getting converted into the self-sufficient application. What I mean by self-sufficient application here is something that comes onto the next slide. So let's wait for that. So the overall approach change is what is needed, is what I see, and it's basically focusing on updating the part of the web page depending on the state of the associated data. So in order to deal with the data on the server side and the client side at a time, I believe the spread action provides the easiest and simplest mechanism to kind of achieve this. In a way, this is nothing but a kind of efficient use of REST APIs, because your REST APIs are there to kind of support CRUD operations, and if you can interact with them from the client side with ease, then that's where we see the best use of the client, REST services, as well as kind of the simplicity gets into the picture. Like as these REST APIs will take care of the backend application, now we need something similar, like a client-side MVC framework on the UI side, as we start to operate not only with the HTML but with the data on the page as well. In addition, there are some of the other factors like HTML5 enhancements, like local storage and the development of templating engines are also playing kind of a key role in pushing for the implementation and use of the JavaScript framework here. So while describing the change in the web page, I talked about kind of a web page getting converted into an application. Such applications are nothing but what are referred as a single page application. So let's take a quick look at what these single page applications are and what is the approach here. So basically this SPA is nothing but a web application where the majority of interactions are handled on the client side. So there is very less need or almost no need to kind of reach to a server apart from getting the data. That's where the key difference is. And the goal here is to provide a more fluid user experience by means of the overall approach. So if we have to kind of understand it better, let's take a look at the diagram that is there on the screen. So on the server and client, there are certain components that are part of any single page application. So what it means is basically on the server we are talking about two different types of components or sections, where one is about user interface and second one is about data services. So that's where we are separating the responsibility. And on the right hand side you can see there are 3 or 4 components. So let's see how they are related to each other. So the first one on the client side you see is a kind of a client UI, which is again a static set of resources by means of HTML and CSS that are hosted on the server. So browser would load those first. Then you have a UI logic by means of your code, the JavaScript code, or maybe some of the libraries or the framework that we are using. So they are again a static resource, so created once and then put on the server as a part of the UI component. And then you have a client data access where there is a layer that connects to your data services or the data layer onto the server side to kind of fetch or update it. So eventually the UI logic and the client data access layer on the UI side itself would take care of combining the data and the presentation from the client UI, that's the HTML CSS, to create a dynamic view out of it. So there's almost no processing for creating a dynamic view happening on the server side. What server is doing is basically kind of catering UI assets and the data that is needed, and the rest of the things are taken care on the UI side of it. So that's what basically is the application working on the client side completely using these JavaScript frameworks or libraries to present a very fluid user experience to the user. So basically, there are certain features or the factors of the single page application which eventually kind of triggers the need of a framework onto the client side. And as we talk about framework, the MVC has worked very well for the server side, and we see that it also kind of operates very well for the UI side of it because of the modularity and other aspects that it brings in. But what are some of the things that one needs to be aware of when we are going for such kind of approach? So there are certain things that are there on the screen. I'll quickly go through some of the key aspects here. So any application today needs to be responsive or kind of needs to have a native application feel because of the different platforms or devices that needs to be supported. The UI needs to be faster. It has to be more interactive. So in such cases, the single page application is the right choice to go for, and if you want to do a single page application, then JavaScript frameworks like the MVC JavaScript frameworks are a kind of a better fit here. The code reusability aspect, where we are talking about using the REST endpoints that are already developed and kind of for the other purpose, to be consumed by the multiple applications, to be also consumed by the user interface that you are trying to develop to support the multiple platforms. So that's where this MVC JavaScript frameworks play a key role. So if you want to go for a single page application and get into some of the other aspects that we discussed on the first slide, that's where the JavaScript frameworks are coming into the picture. So as we look at some of the technical aspects, let's take a quick look at some of the business angle here as well. So why would one want to create a single page application using these frameworks? Basically, any application today needs to have an app-like user experience, because with the mobility in picture, we want to have like your application running on multiple platforms and also has to work like an application than being a website. So that's where single page application gives that fluid nature to your application, and that's one of the business aspects here. Then you want to reuse your RESTful APIs that are already developed, or some of the third-party APIs that you want to consume. So that's another business angle. Then you want to build the hybrid application using HTML5. So there are a lot of HTML5 features that you want to capitalize onto. So that's where you need a framework or a library to kind of utilize that and bring that into your application flow and build on top of that. So that's where it's a hybrid, where there is a web part of it and then there is a local or native part of it, which you want to kind of bring in together to give a new feature set into your application. Then the mobile version of your website is another important aspect where you want to support it. And this is all where, as we go forward, we'll see these are some of the key features of the JavaScript MVC frameworks as well, and the single page application as we talk. So that's where it caters to different business aspects that are there for your application that you're looking for. So moving on, and the need of the JavaScript MVC framework is something that we just discussed. Let's take a look at some of the key features of the JavaScript MVC framework. So basically, it is built using again a JavaScript language. So it's a scripting language known to almost every front-end developer. It provides ability to organize your front-end applications in a better way. It also helps in reducing the overall complexity in application development. It also supports like easy integrations with other JavaScript libraries and frameworks. This makes it like little bit like very much backward compatible, as well as adds the next level of reusability. Also, the unit testing becomes a lot easy and kind of organized with the use of such frameworks. As we talk about these JavaScript frameworks, it's also important to understand what all exists in the overall ecosystem around the JavaScript language. So what we see at the center here is the JavaScript MVC framework is something that we are discussing today, but there are other factors or the frameworks in the JavaScript that are also complementing. So it's not a standalone or standout components that we are trying to utilize. So there are certain minification frameworks that are there to kind of compress the overall JavaScript assets. Then you have a testing framework which helps in testing the framework or library that you are using along with the code the component that you write out of it. Then the mobile frameworks are there to put up the overall mobile view or the mobile aspect to the application that you are developing. Then you have a templating framework that lets you kind of separate your HTML and business logic or the code from the presentation layer. So that's where the templating is playing a key role. And then you have a JavaScript framework like a jQuery or a regular JavaScript library set, which lets you kind of use some of the already developed features that you don't want to kind of redo in the while doing the MVC framework. So that's how the kind of it depends on some of the other libraries or the components from the JavaScript ecosystem to come up with the overall framework for kind of getting your single page application developed. And that's what probably is a kind of unique factor about JavaScript MVC framework, where it's not an independent entity, where it is trying to use the overall JavaScript ecosystem, and that's where it brings in like good things from everything that exists and gives you ability to take your application to the next level. So as we kind of go through some of the kind of concepts there, let's take a look at what is there under the hood. So on the right hand side, basically what I tried to put together is a different types of requests that I see being kind of initiated by the web application or a single page application today. So first one we have is a kind of a browser loading different assets from the HTTP server. So it includes HTML scripts or anything that is static in nature would be kind of handled by such kind of requests. And we have a XML HTTP request in a way kind of connecting to your REST API layer, where it takes care of kind of transmitting your data to and fro between your web application or the UI side of it to the backend side of your application. And then the WebSocket basically there, if you want to go real time, where you want to operate on certain streams or the data streams, then you have WebSockets to kind of play around with. So these are the three types of requests, and the way I see it, wherein the JavaScript MVC frameworks have their own components to kind of support these three types of requests. So on the left-hand side, if you see, there are different components like model, view, routers, controllers, data store, taking care of some of this. So this is where the model is responsible for kind of being a connection, or the entity responsible for having a connection between your REST API and the overall view. So any operation happening on the data or any data that needs to be fetched from the REST layer would be kind of taken care by the model layer that exists. And then you have a controller that takes care of kind of translating actions from views to the model, and the router and views taking care of the overall representation of the user interface, the user based on different actions. It keeps on changing between different views that exist, and they are defined by means of templates and the declarative UI mechanism. So as we get into the, like they said, AngularJS, we talk about what is this declarative UI as well. And they are basically making use of these DOM APIs to kind of render your content, render your response onto the UI side of it, and a data store layer which basically talks to your server to get the data or save the data the way it is like changed from the view. So that's what in a way is at high level the different components of the MVC framework that exists in the JavaScript. So what we talked about was like more of a high-level picture, where we talked about every component that exists in the JavaScript MVC framework. Let's take a look at three key things that we are kind of referring as MVC, that is model, view, and controller, and how they are responsible for our implementation of these frameworks. So what exactly it involves is there is a view where it kind of is responsible for the presentation of the user interface to the user, where it kind of operates onto the DOM and the templates that exist there to kind of create a view using data that is based from the services that we have. And controller is responsible mainly for kind of translating actions of the users from the view into the model layer, where then those can be propagated into the storage layer of the application. And the model is in a way responsible for fetching the data from the services as well as saving back the changes that are done from the view by means of the controller. So that's what is basically is a MVC architecture in a nutshell, whether it's on the client side or the server side. But as we are talking about the client side of it, that's how it kind of operates in a way. So as we go through some of these MVC aspects, what options are available in the market today? So these are some of the key names from the market that most of the people are using. So there's a long list. I have tried to kind of bring in some of the highly rated or some of the commonly used frameworks that exist. What we want to talk today is basically about AngularJS, BackboneJS, and EmberJS for this scope of this session. So to start with BackboneJS, it's nothing but a lightweight MVC framework where it came in like 2010, almost like 5 years from like in the past. It is popular as a lean alternative to kind of heavy or full feature MVC frameworks such as JS. So being lightweight is one of the highlights of the BackboneJS. Some of the main concepts of the BackboneJS here. So the key objects on which BackboneJS operates are given on this slide. So model basically contains the data and provides business logic to use in the application. Then the collection is basically a set of models that can be processed in the loop or support sorting and filtering mechanism. So in a way, kind of provide a mechanism to work on the set of models or collection of models. And the view, it is basically responsible for rendering the model or the collection onto the user onto the view side of it and let user interact with it. So it lets user operate onto the data by means of a single model or a collection to perform certain actions. Then the templates basically they are used for separation of HTML from JavaScript in the view. By default, underscore template engine is used by BackboneJS, but it can be replaced by something like Twig, which is like used in the Drupal or Mustang. Routers, they're basically similar to the hook menu, so it allows you to define the path and provide fallback. So it's nothing but like it lets you replicate the mechanism of sending requests to the server and getting response back. So this is where it kind of creates a mechanism where like requests are getting sent to the framework and the views are written. So you get to see the changes in the URL and the browser window, but the request is not sent back to the server, wherein it is handled on the UI side itself, but it still acts as a page change or the view change the way it would act for it would work for any non-SPA or non-MVC framework application. Then the next one is the history object. Basically, is a global object which contains the router that is currently in use. So you can it's in a way state of the current URL is what we can say. So it lets you kind of operate on that. Different attributes of a router that is currently in use can be kind of handled by means of the history object. And then some of the objects that we just talked about, like model, collection, views, or router, they implement this event object. Now they can provide their own event by means of this or listen to the events from other objects to kind of perform certain operations. So that in a way is what events are there for. So these are some of the concepts of the Backbone JS. So as we talk about the MVC framework and Backbone being MVC, there is still a slight difference in the working model of the architecture of the BackboneJS and the traditional MVC pattern here. So at the left, you can see there is the MVC structure, which is a conventional one. What we see here is that the model updates the view seen by the user, and then user can perform actions which are in a way handled by the controller. Now, controller manipulates model data here and then kind of trigger the business logic method. It also where the model is kind of synchronized with the storage to keep track of, to fetch data or to keep track of the changes back to the storage. Wherein on the right hand side there is a slight difference when you see the BackboneJS structure. So So the main difference here is that some of the controller functionality is basically implemented by the view, while some of it is implemented by the router. So what we talked about controller doing is kind of fetching the data and changing the saving the changes done by the user. So some of it, in case of Backbone, is handled by the router, and some of it is getting handled by the view. Is what is the difference? So typically here view is kind of listening to the model events and update it on, so that's where the refresh of the view is happening. Wherein here view also listens to the user events and updates the model accordingly, so that's where changes are getting reflected back into the storage. Now here model is synchronized with the server using the REST approach, so that's where the taking care of kind of propagating user actions back to the view, back to the model, or changes to the model reflecting back into the view is taken care by the view here, not by the controller. And the other part of it, of reading the data, read operations is typically controlled by the router here, while the write operations are controlled by the view. So that is the difference that we see when we look at the traditional MVC and the Backbone MVC pattern here. So that's more about like Backbone.js. Let's get into some of the details onto the Angular quickly. So Angular, basically, this is another open source JavaScript framework, came in like in 2009. It's maintained by Google, and it's also developed. It is one of the kind of actively developed and well supported JavaScript framework. So some of the key features, some of them we already discussed. So being a MVC framework, there is a quite overlap between all of three. So some of them we have already discussed. Some of them are different from others. So one of them is like a declarative HTML approach, where in case of Angular, you can do your presentation layer using the declarative HTML. So you can define your own tags. You can add kind of different attributes to existing HTML tags. So it's all declarative in AngularJS. Then two-way data binding is another important feature of the AngularJS. So what it means is basically any change happening in the view is automatically reflected into the storage, and any change to the store would automatically reflect back into the or any change to the model would basically reflect into the view. So that's the two-way data binding here. Then the reusable components, it provides you a lot of reusable components. You can define your own reusable components, so that ability exists. It operates on the model view model design pattern, which is in a way the extension of MVC. We'll see what exactly it is in a next set of slides. Then the dependency injection is another important aspect. We'll go over that soon. Then end-to-end integration testing and unit testing is quite easy, or it is more structured with AngularJS because of its modularity aspect. It lets you separate out your components of your code. So based on the services, on the model, and the controllers, they are so well separated that your unit testing and integration testing becomes really easy. The routing is another important aspect, where it takes care of kind of changing the views on the client side, and there are certain advantages of that. Then the templating is again there to separate out your presentation logic and the actual JavaScript apart. So that's where the templates are playing a key role in AngularJS as well. As we talk about some of the key concepts, there is a working principle on which the Angular kind of works, and I feel it's a base for overall implementation of AngularJS. So what it is basically, so we call it an HTML compiler that Angular has. So Angular's HTML compiler basically it allows, in a way, it kind of teaches new HTML syntax to the browser. So that's where the declarative approach coming into the picture. This allows you or a developer to attach behavior to kind of any HTML element or an attribute of HTML element. Or to kind of go a next step further, it lets you create your own HTML element or the attribute with custom behavior. So that's where the HTML is nothing but a declarative syntax that you're working on, and this is where the compiler is playing a role to kind of let you do that. And they call it a directive, basically. So the compiler in the Angular is basically nothing but a service that kind of traverses through a DOM looking for certain attributes. So it happens in two phases. So first stage is to kind of compile, where it traverses the DOM and collects all the directives so which are declared in the DOM, and then it passes that information to the linker where it combines the directive with the scope. Scope is nothing but the model or the data object that is associated with your directives, and then produces a live view of it. So any changes in the scope model are reflected in the view, or any user interactions with the view are reflected back into the scope model, and eventually into the storage is what basically the two-way binding that we were talking about in the initial slide. Moving on, another important aspect of the AngularJS is a MVVM pattern that it supports. So as we have seen in the beginning about MVC, so this is again something very similar, but you can notice a difference on the left-hand side where the connection between view and model is a two-way, wherein the connection between view controller and view model controller is a one-way. So that is where the two-way data binding playing a key role is one of the different aspects, and that's where the view model are tied to each other. That's why it is referred as a model view model pattern, where any change happening in the model would reflect into the view, and any change interaction happening with the view would persist back into the model layer. So apart from this, there are certain other key components of Angular application that we would quickly go through. So first one to start with is a directive. As we talked in the like last slide, directives is a way to teach HTML new tricks or the new ways to define these elements. It lets you kind of make manipulations to your DOM to render your dynamic view. If you want to create your own tag or an attribute, this is where you will do it. It kind of, as it lets you create your custom HTML tags, you can have markup created specific to your domain, and so that's where it is an ability to kind of create a domain-specific markup out of it. So at the core, basically, it's nothing but something that takes care of base content, and the overall structure of the element is what directives is. Filters, they are nothing but a reusable operation using which you can modify the content of the page that you are showing. So, for example, you want to kind of convert a text from lowercase to uppercase value, so you can use filter for that. Also, there are certain results, search results you want to kind of filter using certain queries. You can do it using this filter function. Then the templates, this again another useful Angular component where it's a declarative specification that along with the information from the model, so data from the data model layer and the controller, it lets you render the view that user sees in the browser. In a way, it's a static DOM because it contains HTML and CSS along with the Angular specific elements and Angular specific attributes. So that's how it's a static one, but like the Angular adds a behavior and transforms that into that template DOM into a dynamic view at runtime. And then I think the last one or the important one is the dependency injection. Dependency injection is basically the software design pattern that deals with how your code would get ported off its dependencies. Now this is where the Angular removes the responsibility of locating the dependency from the component. This is where the dependency is simply handed over to the component. To manage the responsibility of your the responsibility of the dependency creation here, each Angular application would have its own injector, and the injector is a service locator in a way that is basically responsible for construction and lookup of these dependencies. This means that like any component which does not fit your need, you can easily replace them because it is all declarative and it's kind of plugged in. So you can easily plug that out and bring in the new things as you need. So with that, we'll get into the Ember, and I'll hand it over to Mira to walk us through some of the EmberJS concepts here.
Thank you, Mahesh. Now I will walk you through some EmberJS concepts. Actually, EmberJS is an open source client-side JavaScript web application framework, which is also based on the MVC pattern, that is model view and controller pattern. It was developed in 2011, which is the first initial stable release of the EmberJS. EmberJS is designed to help developers to build ambitiously large web applications that are competitive with the native apps. So EmberJS borrowed some ideas which are pioneered by the native applications frameworks, like let's say examples of frameworks Cocoa and Smalltalk. Small choices are made for you, just like Rails. What is it means? There are many concepts which you can map with EmberJS concept, like active records, which are used for mapping data with the database. This same concept exists in the EmberJS, which is Ember data library, which is actually used for data persistence purpose, and that maps the client-side model with the server-side data. Although we can develop the EmberJS application without using the Ember data library. Next point is that convention over the configuration. As I mentioned that EmberJS by default makes use of the Ember data library. So Ember data can load and save the records and their relationship without any configuration via RESTful JSON API. That follows some certain conventions and providing many of the facilities which are provided by the object relational mapping. So while developing any web application and to make it run, we need to configure it. So by using the EmberJS, we just need to follow the conventions which are provided by the Ember data, and your application will be running within a time. So EmberJS is now dependent on the jQuery library and the handlebar templates. Handlebar actually is the language which is used for building the templates. There are many applications which are currently exist, and they are making use of the Embers, like Discord, Gendex, Live Social, Groupon, SquareUp, and YApp. Most of these applications are open source, and you can take a look onto this, how EmberJS is working fantastically in these applications. While developing any web application, it is more important to reduce the effort of the maintenance than it is to reduce the effort of the implementation. Now let's take a look onto some core concepts of the EmberJS, as it is also based on the MVC pattern. So most of the concepts will be similar to the AngularJS and the BackboneJS. So we'll first take a look onto the templates. Templates are basically written in the handlebar templating language, and it describes the user interface of your application. Each template is backed with a model, and the template actually updates itself when the model got changed. Now let's take a look onto the responsibility of the routers in the EmberJS. The router translates a URL into a series of nested templates. Each template is backed by a model. As the template or the model being shown to the user, it changes, then the Ember beauty is that it automatically changes the URL in the browser's address bars to keep it up to date. So at any point of time, user is able to share the URL of an application with the outside world. The next concept is the component. Components are used for creating the custom tags, like Mahesh describes. You can have declarative HTML. Here in Ember, we can make use of the components for creating the custom HTML tag, whose behavior you implement using the JavaScript and whose appearance you describe using the handlebar templates. Components are used for creating the reusable controls that can simplify your application's template. Next concept is the model. Actually, model is an object that stores the persistent state of your application. Templates are responsible for displaying the model to the user by converting it into the HTML. Next one is the root. Root is an object that tells the template which model it should display. Now here the Rails beauty is that if any developer forgets to create the let's say controller for your any model, then Ember will automatically create the controller for this model depending on what your model is returning. Suppose your model returns the array, then it will create the array controller for your application. Otherwise, you will get the object controller. Also, Ember is creating some routes for your application like index route. Next one are views. Views are used for combining the templates with the data. Also, they are responsible for respond to the user-initiated events. Means views first view will take the user-initiated request, then it will translate then it will dispatch that request to the controller for taking further actions onto that request. Now I will hand over to Mahesh.
Okay, thanks, Meera. So as we kind of went through these three key frameworks, now I'll quickly kind of go over some of the analysis that we have done based on the work done in the past. So we're trying to kind of give you idea in terms what are the good points about these frameworks, and I will not call them bad, but some of the pain points that we have came across so far to kind of give some quick insights into them. So to start with AngularJS, definitely they have brought many innovative concepts to the world of web developers, so that has been a real positive of AngularJS. They support the two-way data mining, which saves a lot of boilerplate code, so you don't need to worry about taking care of the reflecting changes between two ends of your application. The largest community and probably is one of the frameworks that has much more online content available for you to refer. It has a very good modularity achieved, so there is the way you write the code in Angular, it uses a very good modular organization of your code, which makes it even better for the other aspects like unit testing and even overall the maintenance aspect of your code. It lets you kind of create the reusable components, lets you extend the HTML by defining new elements and the behavior, so that is another advantage of AngularJS. There has been a lot of emphasis on the separation of concern, where you can kind of do the unit isolation or provide ready-to-use and powerful mockups for the fundamental built-in services. So that has been one of the key differentiators of the AngularJS over the period. From the pain points, as we keep on talking about the extensibility and the way you can add meaning to your HTML tags or kind of define new tags, the directives is the means to do that, but the APIs for directives are not that easy. They are one of the complex thing in the AngularJS. So if you understand them, then nothing like it, but it takes a while to kind of get to the familiarity around these concepts. Then use of the templates, basically it is a good thing in a way, but it's again another way of looking at it, where as we start using these templates, we tend to kind of bring in some of the code into the template, which makes it less testable, because as you bring in the code into the template, it becomes non-testable. Then some of the errors or typos that you make during the code, it becomes really hard to locate because of the declarative approach here. You have to really dig through and identify any of the errors or typos that you have made. So in case you do that, then it kind of tends to increase the development effort or the time it takes to do that. So either you need to be really cautious about not making those errors, or if you do that, then that becomes another pain point to handle. A lot of interactive elements, if you put on your web page, it kind of tend to become a little bit slow as you kind of move through your application. So it's again more about how you do it, but in a way, if you are not pro, then you will definitely hit this situation sooner or later. Getting into the Backbone.js, so the good about it, again, the lightweight, the nature of the library itself is a highlight here, where it's fast and has a very small memory footprint overall. Learning curve is very linear. It is the smallest library. There's not much to kind of worry about, and then the great documentation helps in learning it easy, and kind of you can get started using it in very less time. APIs are very stable, so there is not much change happening unless, and that's what makes it really good. Some of the pain points, it does not provide any structure like putting the controller services and models separate. Install you have to take care of, and then that's where there is no, it does support it, but there is nothing that enforcing you need to do it. So that's where it tends to be less structured, which can be a pain point as you kind of have a larger code base to maintain. Some of the memory management issues has been observed where you need to be a little bit cautious about not creating any memory leaks. Lack support for two-way data binding, which is, as we saw the AngularJS, that two-way data binding support is not there with the backbone. Hard to unit test, it is a little bit more fragile and less reusable is another thing that you need to be aware of about the BackboneJS. Getting into the Ember, as Meera mentioned, like it automatically infer much of the configuration itself, so there is less for you to do it. It gets you started in like almost no time. Excellent router and optional data layer that kind of integrates really nice with the backend, like any system that has a RESTful JSON API support. So so that makes it really stand out. Better performance. What I have observed so far is the application loads and runs very fast. If you take a look at the application like Discourse, and the performance of it is really phenomenal. So this library has something in it which kind of lets you, if your application the UI needs the performance, then definitely this is the choice. This is the best choice, is what I feel. Some of the pain points, what has been observed on the Ember side is that they have changed their APIs so frequently that even before stabilizing it, they kind of got into changing them. So that may be an advantage when it goes for a library or that framework side of it, where you get more things coming in more structured way, or whatever things need to be fixed are happening. But from the support standpoint, I mean, what we see is there is a lot of outdated content, and the examples that are available on the internet which are no longer working for that particular new library, and it becomes a little difficult to kind of learn beyond some of the basic concepts of the EmberJS at times. So as we kind of looked at some of the good and pain points on this framework, so how one would go about choosing them. So if I have to list, I mean, there will be definitely 10 to 15 points to start with, and then the list would keep growing based on the need of the each application. But what I'm trying to do here is kind of pick 5 key things that I felt that are important for any of the while choosing any of these MVC frameworks and how to go about it. So that's what I'll quickly go over. So I think the first thing is about the set of features that these libraries support. So in a way, these various JavaScript MVC frameworks are nothing but a set of common features that kind of will help developers build these single-page applications. Now, there will be some main features of the JavaScript MVC framework that we have discussed so far that we would want to kind of have in any of these frameworks. So first thing I would say is that two-way data binding between the HTML and the client-side JavaScript object model that you want to look for. Support for view templates is another aspect. Then the data storage capabilities, where you would want to have local or through a web server to a database. So both support is something that you would desire. Maybe local one may not be of that importance if you don't intend to kind of utilize the HTML5 capabilities. Otherwise, that is a good thing to look for. The URL routing basically helps you kind of keep your back button functional, as well as let your search engine go through the web page. Now, as your dynamic content is getting rendered onto the UI side, you want to make sure that search engines are able to kind of get to the content that you would want to kind of index. So that is another important aspect. The support has to be there for that URL routing. Based on the need, probably this list can play a key role in terms of the feature set. Then the maturity of the framework, basically considering how mature each framework is, definitely helps you kind of understand how big of a risk you are taking when using these newer technologies in your project. So basically what we're talking about here is a new or unproven framework can have problems with documentation, scalability, overall stability of the APIs, as we talked about Ember, or the overall support, wherein how many developers know it, how to find them, and things like that. So that could probably play a key role in choosing this framework. So some of the things that probably I would say to be considered here are like how many real-world production apps are using this particular framework, or like how many users are there for that particular app. Then how good is the documentation? Like what are the examples available? How many tutorials are there? How good they are? Are the examples up to date? The APIs are stable? So some of these aspects. So based on the understanding so far, I think the order of the maturity on these 3 frameworks would probably go like this, wherein the Backbone.js I would count as the most mature of the lot. wherein the Angular would come next and the Ember would be the next one, because there are certain issues with the accessibility here. Moving on, another aspect is the size. This may not look much more relevant, but there are some derived factors out of it. So it is important to understand how big a download each of these frameworks is and what you are getting for that extra weight in your application. The overall size definitely applies the performance, but may not be the relevant one. But it also gives you an indication on how ambiguous this framework is basically. It also indicates like on how long it might take to learn this new technology. Lighter frameworks are more like a library where there are smaller commitment to include in the project. In case of the three frameworks that we discussed so far, I think Backbone is the smallest one and Ember is the biggest, wherein Angular would kind of fit in between those two. Moving on, the next criteria is the number of dependencies that are involved. So dependencies is mainly about like what other libraries are required in case you want to build a real-world application out of these frameworks. So AngularJS has almost no dependency, wherein in case of web applications, if you are doing it using Backbone, then it depends on the underscore and jQuery along with the core Backbone library. Then, and in case of mobile, it depends on the Zepto.js in addition to the underscore and Backbone. Wherein if you go to Ember, then it depends on handlebars and jQuery along with some of the core Ember frameworks. So that's what goes for the dependency aspect of it. And the last one that I have on the list is the community. Now, community is one of the most important factors to consider when you are choosing an open source framework like this. So a large community basically means more questions answered, more third-party tools available, more third-party modules available, more tutorials and stuff like that. I think Backbone and Angular are the most established ones, wherein the Ember is experiencing growth from the community aspect as well. So there's not much to choose between, but still that's how it stands today. So moving on is what I have is a couple of demo screens that I would want to walk you through to kind of understand what is the single page application and how it is kind of, what are the things that are driving us to kind of get into implementing it using single page approach. So in this application, basically, if you look at the the overall layout of the web page, you can notice that on the left-hand side there is a feed which needs to be updated continuously, wherein on the right-hand side section there is a like a detailed view of it. So basically, this is where we had need of keeping updating the sections at runtime, and that's where the Angular was the best fit to create our own directive to kind of do the left-hand side view, and then that's what we have implemented using the Angular. And on the second screen, I have an application where there are certain set of filters that need to update the data in the map view. So again, there was a lot of interaction happening between the server and the client, where we had to again go for a two-way binding using AngularJS, and that's what helps us to get the single page application approach implemented for this particular application. I think that's what brings me to the end of the session here. So now we'll be taking questions from the audience. I remind you once again that if you have any queries, please type them in the question pane. Due to the time constraint, if we are not able to kind of cover your questions, then what we'll do is we'll definitely send you the Q&A document covering answers to all the questions raised in the session today. Okay, so here I have the first question. So what it says is, how would you rate these frameworks from the integration perspective? So if you want to integrate into the existing application, so can that be a factor for choosing the framework, or how would you rate it? Definitely, I think this is one of the important criteria, but I kind of it did not make to my list of top 5 for certain reasons, because what I believe is if you are going for a single page application, then you may not want to kind of tweak your existing app. You would probably start over, and then that's where the overall approach should start. But from the integration standpoint, if at all there is a need to kind of bring in these frameworks into the existing application, then this is what I would say. So in case of AngularJS, it works well with other libraries, but there are discussion threads in community. So this is not my personal experience, but from some of the readings, what I see is that it suggests to kind of keep it away from jQuery and jQuery UI. Apart from that, you might want to give it a try and see how it goes, and let me know as well your findings. So that would help me too. Then the backbone, basically, I would say because of its small footprint, it's like easy to include with multiple client-side libraries and server-side technologies. So yes, good to go. And EmberJS probably, I think it is more intended to control your whole page at runtime. So it is not definitely suited to kind of use for the part of your web page by integrating into your application. So probably would say no go for the Ember kind of framework here. I hope that answers your question. Okay, now we have a few more questions coming in, but my team is indicating to me that I have just time for one more question. So I'll take. Okay, so what I'll see is there's another question to take is that. Okay, so the question is it necessary to use MVC JavaScript framework while developing a single page application, or can it be done without using this framework? How exactly does it relate to a single page application? Okay, now this is an interesting question because as I started or opened up the session, I talked about the web application user interface and then tried to relate it to a single page application. And eventually was what I felt was a kind of setup for the overall use of the setting up the need for overall JavaScript MVC frameworks. Now, the way I see it is with the single page application, there are certain reasons you would go for a single page application wherein you want to give a app-like behavior to your application. You want more fluid interaction. There are so many interactive components on the interface where they need to be changed frequently. There is a lot of data interaction happening. Now, with all this, it is important to kind of have a functionality at the back end that will kind of let you synchronize all of this with your REST layer or a data layer as well. Now, if you want to do that, then you don't want to write everything on your own. So if you want to go without a JavaScript MVC framework, fine, you can do it, but there is a lot of stuff that already exists with this framework which you would want to kind of utilize, and that's what I would also recommend, that if you are going for a single page application, then why to reinvent the wheel? You simply go with the JavaScript MVC framework and that's all. Okay, I think that probably is it for today's session. Just for your information, today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone will receive an email with a link to view to a recording of this event along with the Q&A document. Finally, I would request you to please fill in a short feedback survey form that will pop up on your screen once you exit the webinar. I believe that it won't take you long, but will surely provide us important insight on how to improve and what topics to choose from in the future. With this, we conclude today's session. Once again, thank you all for joining us and have a great day ahead. Thank you.